I wanted to follow up on some questions on Brexit, and then I have a question about the CJRS administration. Just on the question of Brexit, what's the estimated cost to businesses from whatever the new customs arrangements will be from the 1st of January? I mean, there's a report back in July in the FT that suggests that British companies trading with Europe will have to absorb post-Brexit bureaucracy burden and fill in an extra 215 million customs declaration at a cost of about 7 billion a year, according to government officials. And that's in the context of, even if we get a deal, given the delay and the last minute approach to negotiations. Starting with Jim, could you say something about that and those assertions?
Yes, so I mean, that is a figure I recognise. My department published figures, I think, towards the end of 2019, in which we set out what we expected the administrative burden to be of completing additional customs declarations. I don't think we have published any further update to that, but that figure still stands, and that from recollection was about £7.5 billion for the costs on the UK side of completing our declarations. That is largely unaffected by the outcome of negotiations with the EU about the free trade agreement, because whether there is or is not a free trade agreement, customs declarations will have to be made when we leave the customs union, and therefore those costs by and large would apply in either scenario.
So an additional so that's a £7 billion additional cost, and you stand by the 215 million additional customs declarations point, alongside many of the points that you've discussed with the chair already about the pressures on.
Yes, so we. I mean, in 2017, there were 54 million customs declarations made in the UK. After the end of the transition period, we would expect that to go up to 265 million. That won't apply straight away because import controls are being staged in over 6 months, but that's the rate at which you would expect to see them from July.
From July, okay. And you mentioned earlier to the chair that we're not looking, we're not the external readiness of traders and hauliers in relation to imports hasn't been factored in some of the points you made. How much disruption should we expect coming from the other side, even though the UK has got given itself another 6 months?
Yeah, so our approach here is to support businesses to get ready.
Yep.
And the government has already taken 2 major sort of contingency steps in recognition of the lack of readiness. One is the staged introduction of import controls over 6 months, and the other is the free trader support service in respect of goods movements from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. And those should significantly ameliorate the impact of a lack of readiness, particularly on goods movements into GB from the EU from day one. The EU has not announced any similar provisions. They have said full import controls will apply, and it remains to be seen how they will actually administer that on day one. But I would expect them to have the same kind of readiness issues with their importers that we have on our side. And that's why the government has taken extra steps in the UK to protect Kent from the impacts on traffic in Kent that might flow from disruption on the European side of the border.
Just on that, are you satisfied that those extra efforts will be sufficient to not cause huge amounts of disruption and chaos at the beginning of the year?
I mean, I think we keep monitoring it, and we will have to be very observant and flexible sort of in the moment. The latest information is that readiness has improved beyond the reasonable worst case that the government announced several months ago, and therefore disruption should be less than that reasonable worst case. But there can be localized effects, there can be effects on particular routes, there can be effects on particular sectors. I think we'll have to continue supporting businesses through the 1st of January and beyond to manage this. The government has been clear that it wishes to prioritise flow, and it will be ready, I think, to take decisions in the moment as it needs to in order to manage that.
Okay, just turning on to weekend reports about the COVID vaccine. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there was a report suggesting that the British military would potentially have to fly in COVID vaccines into the UK to avoid delays at ports following the end of the transition period. Have you been in any discussions with the Department for Health and MOD and others in planning for any disruption in terms of being able to bring vaccines in from Belgium without having to enlist the British military to fly those vaccines in? I
have been involved in cross-Whitehall discussions on how we make sure that sort of priority one goods can flow into the country and not be affected by any disruption. I certainly have not been party to any talks about using the military in relation to vaccine movements, but the government does have plans in place to make sure that if there is short-term disruption, that key goods will be able to move, and that is a responsibility primarily of the Department for Transport.
Right. So we shouldn't be surprised if on day one, if there is a no-deal scenario, that the military could be enlisted to bring in vaccines from Belgium or elsewhere using the military if there is major disruption.
I have no
as that
direct
article suggests.
I have no direct knowledge of that. Certainly the discussions that I've been involved in have not gone into that. Okay,
thank you. Just one final question, which is in relation to your last appearance in the committee. As you know, since then, the committee published a report on the impact of coronavirus on the economy, highlighted that 1 million people, at that time, the committee identified 1 million people who are excluded from any support from the government schemes. Others have suggested it's up to 3 million, and there has been widespread cross-party push from parliamentarians asking for more support, including from this committee, to help those who are excluded. And at the time, you made a legitimate point, which was about the fact that it's quite complex to try and administer programs for the self-employed and others who fall into that category. And yet the Public Accounts Committee, in the session that you spoke at recently, you pointed to the fact that 3.5 billion of furloughed money has been paid out in error. And that was one of the reasons that you gave to our committee why actually it's quite difficult to administer support to those groups. Could you say a bit about how that money is being recovered, where errors have been made, and given people would be, those who haven't had support would and have raised this point with many of us, which is that if HMRC is prepared to make a 3.5 billion error in terms of administration, is that a price worth paying, but not actually while others continue to suffer who have had no support for months, and what can be done to correct those errors so that those who do need help do actually get it?
Thank you. So I'm going to, if it's okay, ask Penny Chinovich to come in a moment to describe
Sure.
what we're doing to tackle error and fraud. Just 2 points to make. First of all, the error and fraud that you're talking about there is not administrative error by HMRC. It is error or fraud by people making claims. When we were planning for the schemes, we had to make some planning assumption about what the level of error and fraud would be. And in the case of the coronavirus job retention scheme, the sort of furlough scheme, we made a planning assumption that it could be 5 to 10%. Obviously, we have got no history of these schemes in which to make that judgment, but we know that the general tax cap is 4.7%. We see 4.9% error and fraud in tax credits, for example. So it's not unusual to have that level of error and fraud towards the lower end of that range in schemes. However, it is simply a planning assumption. We have a range of protections in place. The first protection, which sort of goes to the excluded groups, is that people who can make claims are people who have a history with us, whether both the employers have to have a pay-as-you-earn history with us, and the the employees in respect of whom they make claims have to have a pay-as-you-earn history with us. There are then risk assessment and checks that we can do prior to payment where we've got any concerns about a claim, and then we've got the ability post-payment to make recovery, and we've already recovered a significant amount and also taken action in sort of criminal investigation action. But
sorry, just one thing, how much have you recovered?
If you don't mind, I'll ask Penny Chinovich to pick this up because she's responsible for compliance in HMRC. That's Penny's area.
Thanks very much. So, as Jim explained, there are a number of different forms of compliance that we're looking at. Obviously, there's the risk of criminal attack, and there's then a risk of opportunistic fraud where people perhaps make claims to which they're not entitled, and then obviously there's the possibility of error and genuine mistakes being made by people in the heat of the moment. We know very much from experience that the funds that would be lost to criminal attack are very hard to retrieve, so we prioritise designing in controls to prevent those criminal attacks in the first instance, and that's where, as Jim said, one of the important controls was knowing that applicants had a footprint with us already, and that provides quite a helpful, strong control in that context. We also put in checks to see whether people are looking as though there might be suspicious factors involved before the claims went out. And then obviously we have two legs of work following that. One is to give people the opportunity to self-correct. As we have been doing over the last few months, they have 90 days from the date of the claim to correct their claim if they've made a mistake. And then we also have compliance investigation processes. So overall, we rejected around 15,500 claims from both Cs and CJRS with a value of around £60 million. But we risked close to 140,000 of those while, where we've made further checks as part of that process. In the case of CJRS, we rejected claims worth 12 million as part of our risking process. And our feeling is that, that enabled us to block most suspect payments and indeed, prevent a lot of the criminal attack that would otherwise have happened. And based on the work to date, we obviously recognise that as we do our further post-payment compliance work, there might be more suspect claims come to light, but we believe that levels of criminal attack are very low, somewhere in the region of 0 to 0.6%. In the case of the CJRS. So having risked that many claims, 11.9 million, and put all of that effort into trying to make sure that we don't let suspect claims out the door, we've then done more, which is before Royal Assent, we contacted high-risk claimants. We called around 5,000 claimants to nudge them to check their claims. And we also obviously have a fraud investigation hotline where we have taken the reports from that fraud investigation hotline, and we have used the data and information we already have to highlight risky claims. So around 5,700 investigations are open at the moment. Around 2,000 of those relate to investigations resulting from reports to the fraud hotline. And we are continuing to work those investigations, and we will work more as and when we feel that we have reasons to make sort of inquiries into suspicious claims. Throughout that period, however, people have also been repaying, and in the context of error overall, so far, we've had around £504 million made in terms of voluntary disclosures and corrections, including people who were entitled to the grant but decided to pay it back.
Hey, Penny, thank you. And thanks, Rushanara.